Hello and welcome. This is World Today TVP World. I'm Rafał Tomański. The history of Russian-Iranian cooperation is very long. Authorities in Tehran for years have been regarded as an ally of Moscow. Recent high-profile media deliveries of unmanned drones from Iran to Russia are to some extent a symbol of this relation. Sky News reported in settlement for Iranian drones, a plane packed with $140 million in cash took off from Moscow on 20th of August. The plane also contained captured Western weapons that fell into Russian hands during the war in Ukraine. How close are Iran's relations with Russia? What benefits do they get from this cooperation? We'll discuss this topic with our two guests. The first, Mr. David Cannon, retired senior analyst at the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and as well Johns Hopkins University and Texas A&M University. And the second guest, Professor Dr. Marcin Staszyński, Institute of Oriental Studies from Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań. Good evening, gentlemen. Great to have you with us, both of you. Maybe at the beginning, it's not the most important detail, but Mr. Cannon, using your intelligence, as you work for CIA, experience, why such huge amount of money was delivered in cash to Iran?
I could only speculate, and I wouldn't really want to do that. Again, I've heard the same reports you have. I don't know how much of that is true, how much of that is reporting. I'm really not going to comment on something that I don't know anything about.
Of course, but if it would be true, avoiding sanctions, because it's like a scene from a gangster movie.
It happens quite frequently, I think. This is nothing all that unusual. It's a transaction. Both sides are satisfied with the transaction. Its purpose can be speculated on, but I don't frankly see it as all that important.
So let's go to Dr. Staszyński. Sir, what is the history in brief of the relations between Tehran and Moscow?
First, good evening. It's a pleasure to see you once again, including our colleague from Johns Hopkins University. It's a pleasure. So that's also a good question. And you mentioned important issues regarding these transactions in cash. But the relations between Iran and Russia have a long history, and we can consider them step by step, because it started in the 16th century during the Russian Empire. So we don't have time to consider and explore all those steps, different steps in history, in modern history, and during the Persian and Russian Empire. But there were some waves, some positive waves and optimistic waves between the both countries, and negative approaches. For instance, during the Islamic Revolution in 1979, the public opinion usually consider the relations quite good between Russia and Iran, but we should remember that Russia in that time supported Iraq, for instance, Saddam Hussein, against Iran, against the new government of Ayatollah. So the relations weren't so optimistic. In fact, the good start and good point of bilateral relations, economic and military and diplomatic relations, started, in fact, after 1989, so the collapse of the Soviet Union. And in that time, Iran and Russia started some new perspectives in military cooperation, bilateral cooperation, and collaboration in economy. And we also must add that the ongoing war in Ukraine also started some new objectives in relations between the two countries.
Mr. Cannon, recently anti-government hackers in Iran published a report that clearly shows that the cooperation between Iran and Russia is under supervision of Turkey. Can it be?
Supervision might be the wrong word. The Turks sure know what's going on. Erdogan is serving as the real mediator in this conflict. The French President Macron would like to be that mediator, but it really is Erdogan. It is certainly no surprise that Erdogan, who knows both Russia and Iran very well, is aware of whatever transactions are taking place between these countries. This is one piece of a much more complex web of relations and issues that Erdogan is dealing with as he navigates his efforts to mediate this thing in a way that's going to serve Turkey's interests and also keep things from getting out of hand in the Black Sea as this war goes on.
What kind of benefits can Turkey get from this cooperation of two countries, Mr. Kanin?
Turkey gets cooperation if it is able to midwife relations among any of its neighbors. Remember that Erdogan used to brag about that he had no problems with anybody around his borders. That changed during the Syrian war when miscalculations from Turkey regarding first whether Bashar al-Assad was going to survive at all, and then how he was going to deal with the Russian presence in Syria led to real problems for Turkish foreign policy. The Ukraine war is providing an opportunity for Turkey to sort of resume the position of regional mediator, regional leader that Erdogan has been trying to practice since the beginning of his time in power. He is managing this war very carefully, and the Iran-Russia piece of it is simply one part of a much larger strategic situation that he's dealing with.
Dr. Suszyński, maybe Ankara tries to know as much as possible, not only because the region is familiar with the region, as Mr. Kanin said, but maybe Ankara would like to contain ambitions of Tehran, because I guess the plans are only getting started. We have the nuclear deal, we have the nuclear program, the revival of JCPOA.
Actually, I agree with Mr. David, with our colleague, that Turkey plays a separate role and a regional player and competing with and the rivals and regional rivals from the Gulf, for instance. And Iran, including Iran. So they try to conduct independent policy, and as kind of mediator between Russia and Ukraine. We see this regarding the transportation of wheat, for instance. So Turkey tried to benefit from the ongoing situation, but Ankara always leads its own policy in the region.
Mr. Kanin,
of course, that's returning also to the concept of Ottoman Empire, even. So that's also an important factor.
That's true. That's true. And the role model, I guess, for Erdogan is Atatürk. He's been referring many times to his times. Mr. Kanin, how about the situation in the region after the recent elections in Israel? Maybe a new government of Netanyahu will be more radical than the previous one, and it may cause some troubles as well.
You know, we're really changing topics here. I think that the election in Israel should be looked in the context of elections elsewhere, in Brazil and now in the United States, regarding the tendencies in these different places for populists to attempt to gain control of governments and have more or less success in doing so. The question to me is not so much about Netanyahu himself. He's been around a while. He's been prime minister before. The question is about his coalition partners now. The hard right-wing Kahanist, Ben Gvir and the others. What role will they play? What will be the balance in this new government between the prime minister and this very hardline, very ambitious, and very aggressive group of right-wing populists who have caused some concern in other capitals?
Mr. Suszyński, is Iran ready for this new Kahaist coalition? Is coalition partner in Israel government?
You mean Iran?
Mm-hmm.
Iran with cooperation with partners? You mean in Israel? No.
No. Is Tehran ready for the new challenges that the new government in Israel, the new coalition partners can bring?
Okay, I understand your point. The new government and the previous one as well, always the Iranian factor played an important role in the foreign policy of Israel, including Iran, always. Also, some pro-Iranian states or forces, like in Lebanon, Hezbollah, for instance, including Houthi in North Yemen, also highlighted the question of enemy of Israel. So I don't think that something will change. Even more, Netanyahu always also highlighted the question of Iranian nuclear program, and he insisted on sanctions on Iran. So I don't expect any changes, even more some increase of tensions between especially Israel and Iran in the context of the ongoing, once again, the war in Ukraine. So it will be much worse even.
Mr. Kanyan, do you think that Russia will seek for new partners as well, like the partnership with Iran? Will the other follow?
Right now, Russia is thrashing about for a solution to the Ukraine war and to its military problems. The optic of the Russians going hat in hand to Tehran to beg for weapons from the Iranians is remarkable. Russia, supposedly a great power, now is going to Iran and North Korea and other places just to get weapons to backfill the numbers that they've used. It really is an embarrassment for the Russians. So right now, in my view, the largest strategic issues around Iran and the Middle East and everything else, while the Russians still pay attention to it, are somewhat on the back burner because Russia's losing a war. Russia's in rough shape. And this optic of the Russians now having to look for weapons from these various places just to have enough missiles and bombs to throw at the Ukrainians is really remarkable. And I would not want to underestimate this. I want to go back to the point you asked before about Israel related to Iran. I think this is the government Iran loves to have. This is a government that they can really hate. This is a government that might alienate people in the region. Keep in mind that recently Israel's had a very large degree of success making agreements with Gulf states and other countries that were before had been enemies of Israel. Now the Israelis have good relations with them. This is the kind of government with these very hard right-wing populists in it that Iran might welcome because it might make Israel less of a palatable, attractive partner to other countries in the region.
So maybe, Mr. Kanyan, as you said, maybe we are underestimating Iran rising power currently. What do you think?
Remember that they've got, again, I want to say good news from our colleague from IBeziehungen University pointing out the many problems that they have in Iran. Iran's got its own domestic problems right now. The Iranians are making deals with the Russians. It makes perfect sense to do so. They'll benefit by it. The Russians benefit by it. But none of the countries involved in this discussion are free of their own problems, their own domestic problems. They have to see to those while still taking the opportunities they have internationally. It's a very complex situation right now with many balls in the air, many factors at work. And again, as long as this war is going on in Ukraine, there is a potential for instability in multiple regions that we should not underestimate.
Mr. Styszyński, tell us more about the potential of any kind of change inside the Iran because of the protests. Nearly 2 months have passed since the death of Mahsa Amini, who was a trigger point.
That's, of course, tragic events in Iran regarding young people facing brutality of the secret police and Basij paramilitary groups. We've already, I remember, talked about it, and unfortunately, the previous protests showed that although causes and objectives, they were destroyed or crushed by the government. Of course, the recent and ongoing protests, we see that there are different social and even ethnic groups involved in protest against Ayatollah in Tehran. But however, all previous protests showed clashes between the government and Ayatollah and the populations. So I'm afraid that once again it will be or exploited by internal forces or crushed by the regime. However, we must remember that we have young generations in Iran facing new objectives, new expectations, and they are experiencing the old regime, which completely doesn't understand the new generation in the country.
Mr. Kanin, I remember that your team at CIA was responsible for dealing with some alternative scenarios, maybe kind of thinking out of the box, outside the box thinking. Would you do something different approaching the war in Ukraine, trying to solve this crisis?
There are times when, in a wartime situation, there are times when what really matters is what happens on the ground. Everything depends on how the battle goes. That's why the Russians are in the fix they're in right now, because they're losing the war in the field. The issue is who is going to win in the field and what sort of diplomacy eventually will emerge from the situation on the ground. I could make up lots of different scenarios, but there are times when it's important to focus on the importance of immediate lethal events, and I believe this is one of them. Yes, there are different scenarios that one could postulate. But until things become clearer on the ground, it's not clear that any scenarios that somebody makes up is going to be of much use to the policymaker. The work that we did was never just to make up things on their own and to think outside the box, as you say, on its own. It was always meant to create alternative scenarios for consideration by policymakers in specific contexts. Right now, the context in Ukraine centrally is located in the battlefield. And once we have a better idea of how this is going to conclude, which side or both sides are exhausted and really ready for something beside the fighting, then it'll be time for the kinds of scenarios that you suggest.
Mr. Kanin, are you sure that after such results of the midterm elections, nothing will change in terms of supporting Ukraine from the US government?
It's less likely that things are going to change than it appeared to be before the elections took place. The general wisdom was that the Republican Party, the party out of power, was going to make huge gains, gain control of both houses of Congress, leading to the president of the Democratic Party, from the president of the Democratic Party, basically to be finished in office, to be in the presidency, but much, much weakened. That is not what's happening. To the surprise of many, the election is not producing a huge change in Congress. Now, the Republicans will take the House, but it'll be a smaller majority than one that was predicted for them. It is still not clear which party will have the Senate. The bottom line of that is that it's less likely that the wing of the Republican Party that is very skeptical of international involvement by the United States, much less likely that that wing will gain influence significantly enough to change overall U.S. policy. I believe there will be more arguing over the size of the aid to Ukraine, the dollar figures, and maybe some of the components. But because the Republicans, and particularly the pro-Trump, anti-internationalist wing of the Republican Party, have done much worse than expected, this makes it less likely that there will be a significant change in U.S. policy regarding Ukraine.
Mr. Stashinsky, a few days ago, one of the analysts told me about his interview, his conversation with the Iranian ambassador in Poland. And according to the ambassador quoted by an expert, the JCPOA deal is still on the table. It's nothing is lost for Iran. What do you think about it? Is there a chance for the Western countries to go back to this deal?
That's a very good question. Of course, it's still on the table, as you said. but once again, the situation in Ukraine also changed the perspective because after. And especially after the killing of Soleimani, Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad in 2020 in Baghdad, Iran declared that it would not longer respect the deal, especially after withdrawal of the deal by the U.S. government in 2015. So there are much speculations about the optimistic perspectives of the plan, and it's possible that Russia supported and still supports some nuclear plans and projects in Iran. For instance, that it's a Bushehr reactor in Iran in cooperation with Rosatom. It's coming back to 90s even. So they started, and some Persepolis research, nuclear research programs in Persepolis in southwestern Iran. So everything is on the table, but still there are different directions in that plan. So if Russia will try to exploit or benefit from the ongoing situation in the world, regionally and worldwide, they could increase the threats of nuclear plans headed by Iran. So the joint comprehensive plan action, the situation in the war in Ukraine made more complicated the whole situation.
And as well, Mr. Kanin, the same question on summing the possible scenarios for reviving or not reviving the JCPOA.
At this point, I'm not sure that even matters all that much. Not personal opinion. I think the agreement was not going to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons anyway. But what it did do was give us more information about the progress that they were making. It is on the table. It's off the table. It's going to be discussed. It is never going to be what it was before former President Trump pulled out of it from the American side. So I'm not sure. And when I say this, I'm not saying it's not significant, but I'm not sure what significance it will have. I want to go back to one more point on the U.S. midterm elections. From an intelligence point of view, actually. Before the day of the election, Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group, the Russian mercenary outfit, was bragging about how the Russians have interfered, are interfering, and will continue to interfere in U.S. elections. I believe that indicated that Russians believed, like a lot of people, that the Republicans would do very well, that Putin's friends in the United States, in the sense of not being in favor of American involvement in international relations, that they would do very well. I believe that the Russians were as wrong about this as other people. Raises another question about sort of Russian intelligence as poorly as it is performed since the run-up to the war in Ukraine. So, in other words, one more loser of the elections, the midterm election in the United States, was Russia.
Unless they support the Democrats. And with this conclusion,
well,
we have to end the conversation. Of course, it may be an irony in this situation, but of course, it's a matter of intelligence. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. Mr. David Kanin, retired senior analyst at CIA, Johns Hopkins University and Texas A&M University professor. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir, and pleasure to be there. And thanks also to our colleague from IBeziehungen University.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Marcin Styszyński, Institute of Oriental Studies from the Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań. Thank you, sir, as well.
Thank you very much, and everything the best on the National Day tomorrow in Poland. All the best.
Thank you very much. Same to you, sir.
Yes, congratulations.
Thank you. And that's all we prepared in this episode of World Today. Hope to see you next time. And in the meantime, stay with us for more Military Mind is coming up next.